It's a Tuesday morning, 7:43 a.m. to be exact. I'm sitting in a lawyer's office on the 14th floor of a building downtown. The kind of office where the carpet is so thick it swallows sound, where everything smells like leather and old money and decisions that cannot be undone. Across the table from me sits my stepmother, Diane. She's wearing a cream blazer. Her hair is freshly blown out. She has the kind of composed expression that women like her practice in mirrors. The look that says I am untouchable. I have already won. Beside her sits her daughter, my stepsister, Priya, 34 years old, manicured nails. A designer bag on the chair beside her, like it deserves its own seat. And beside Priya sits their attorney. Expensive suit, expensive watch. The kind of lawyer you hire when you are very confident you are right. I am sitting on the opposite side of the table. I am wearing a navy blazer I bought 3 years ago from a department store sale rack. I have a single manila folder in front of me. It is not thick. It is not dramatic looking. It does not announce itself, but when I slide it across that table, when Diane opens it, when she reads the first page, I watch the color leave her face, not all at once. Slowly, the way winter comes. First the warmth disappears, then the light, and then everything is just cold and gray and inevitable. She looks up at me, and I look back at her, and I say calmly, quietly, the way my father always taught me to speak, when the stakes are highest, take your time. There are 47 pages. That moment, that Tuesday morning, was 8 years in the making. This is the story of how I got there. My name is Sara, and this is what really happened. Before I go any further, if you have ever been lied about to someone you love, if you have ever been painted as the villain in a story where you were actually the one showing up, quietly, consistently, when no one was watching, this video is for you. Hit that like button right now, not for the algorithm, but because you already know where this story is going, and you want the universe to know you're on the right side of it. And drop one word in the comments, just one word that describes how you feel when someone lies about you to the people you love most. One word. I'll be reading them. Subscribe if you're new, because I promise you, by the end of this, you will want to see the rest of the folder. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a house on Greenfield Road in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. It was not a mansion, but it was a good house, a solid house, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen that always smelled like cardamom because my mother cooked with it every single day. My mother's name was Nadia. She was the daughter of immigrants. Her parents had come to this country with $40 into suitcases and had built something small and dignified and real. She passed that philosophy on to me. You build slowly. You build honestly. You do not take what is not yours. My father's name was Harun. He was an engineer by training and a businessman by ambition. Over 23 years, he built a commercial real estate portfolio that by the time I was in my 20s was worth somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million. Depending on the market, depending on the year. He was not flashy about it. He drove a 10-year-old Camry. He packed his own lunch. He believed, deeply and sincerely, that the number in your bank account was private information, not a personality trait. My parents were married for 19 years. Then my mother got sick, ovarian cancer, stage 3, diagnosed in October of 2004. When I was 16 years old and my younger brother Amir was 13, she fought for 2 years. She lost, April 14th, 2006, 6:22 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was there, holding her left hand, and my father was holding her right, and Amir was asleep in the chair, in the corner of the hospital room, because he had been there all night, and his body had finally surrendered to exhaustion even when his heart couldn't. That morning broke something in my father that never fully healed, and broken men, I have learned, are vulnerable in ways that other people can see from very far away. Her name was Diane Kapoor. She was 41 when she met my father. He was 53. She was recently divorced from a man named Richard who, as I would later learn, had left her with considerably less than she had expected from the marriage. She was beautiful in a very deliberate way, the kind of beautiful that requires maintenance and strategy and an audience. She laughed at all of my father's jokes. She called him wise. She asked him questions about his work, and then looked at him like his answers were the most fascinating things she'd ever heard. My father, who had spent 2 years watching the woman he loved disappear, was not equipped for this. He introduced her to us 14 months after my mother's death. Amir was 15. I was 18 and about to leave for college. I remember the first dinner. Diane brought flowers, a large, expensive arrangement that she placed in the center of my mother's dining table, directly over the spot where my mother's old ceramic fruit bowl had always sat. She'd moved the fruit bowl to the counter before she sat down. Such a small thing, but I noticed it. Amir didn't. He was 15, and grieving and desperate for something to feel normal. And Diane was warm to him in a way that landed on his loneliness like a lifeline. I filed the fruit bowl away in the back of my mind. I was 18. I did not yet know that I would spend the next decade building a file. They got married 18 months later. I was in my second year of university, 3 hours away. I came home for the wedding. A small ceremony, only 30 guests, tasteful and well organized, which I gave Diane credit for. Her daughter Priya was there, 22 years old, already working in finance. She was cordial to me at the wedding. Not warm, but cordial. The handshake of someone who has already done the math. My father looked happy. Genuinely, heartbreakingly happy, in the way of a man who had been very sad for a very long time. I told myself, let him have this. I went back to university. I called my father every Sunday, every single Sunday. This is important. Remember this. I graduated with a degree in accounting into a 1.0. I took a job at a mid-size firm in the city where I'd gone to school about 90 minutes from my father's house. I was building my own life, slowly, honestly, the way my mother had taught me, and for the first few years, things were not perfect, but manageable. I came home for my father's birthday. I called every Sunday, but something was shifting in that house on Greenfield Road, slowly. The way winter comes, the first time I noticed it was Eid al-Adha, 2011. I'd driven the 90 minutes home. I'd brought food I'd cooked, which my mother had always done, which I'd been doing every Eid since she passed, because someone had to, and it felt like a way of keeping her in the room. I walked into the kitchen with my containers, and Diane was already there. She'd had the kitchen catered, not a criticism necessarily, but she looked at my containers of food and she said with a smile, with a perfectly pleasant smile, "Oh Sara, you didn't have to do that. We have everything covered." And then she moved my containers to the very back of the counter, behind the catered trays, where no one could easily reach them, where no one did reach them. I ate a small plate of my own food, standing at that back counter alone, while everyone else ate from the front. My father didn't notice. He was at the table, laughing at something Priya had said. I drove home that night. I told myself it was nothing, but I thought about the fruit bowl, and I started paying closer attention. My father's 61st birthday. I called on a Sunday to ask about plans. Diane answered his phone. This was new. She'd never answered his phone before. She told me there was a small family dinner planned. Just close family. I said, great, I'll drive up Saturday morning. There was a pause. Brief, professionally brief. Oh, she said. I wasn't sure you'd want to make the trip. It's quite a drive. It's his birthday, I said. Of course, she said. Of course, come. The way you say come when you mean don't. I came. The dinner was at a restaurant I'd never heard of, a new place Priya had recommended. The kind of restaurant with a prefix menu and no prices listed and a dress code that wasn't stated anywhere but that you were somehow expected to know. I wore the wrong thing. Not dramatically wrong, but wrong enough that Diane noticed and said nothing, which was worse than saying something. At dinner, Priya announced that she'd gotten a promotion. Her company had moved her to the downtown office. She'd be closer now. My father beamed. He put his hand over Priya's and said, "I'm so proud of you. I had, 6 weeks earlier, passed my CPA exam on the first attempt, a test with a national pass rate of approximately 50%. I had told my father on our Sunday call. He had said mashallah, beta, and then asked if I'd eaten because I sounded thin, which is a thing fathers say. I'm not saying he didn't care. I'm saying that by 2012, the frame around me inside that house had already begun to change, and I was too far away to see it clearly. My father had a mild heart episode, not a full attack, a warning. Blockage discovered during a routine checkup. He had a stent procedure in March. I found out 4 days after the procedure, not from my father, from Amir, who texted me, Dad had a heart thing. He's fine. Diane said not to worry everyone. I called my father immediately. He answered this time. He sounded fine. A little tired. A little embarrassed. The way men of his generation get embarrassed by their own bodies failing them. I said, Baba, why didn't anyone call me? He said, Diane said you were busy with work. She didn't want to stress you. I sat with that for a long moment. She didn't want to stress me. She had decided on my behalf what information I deserved to have about my own father's heart. I drove up that weekend. I stayed for 5 days. I cooked. I sat with him. I drove him to his follow-up appointment because Diane had a prior engagement and lunch with Priya that had apparently been scheduled for weeks. My father and I drove to the cardiologist together. He fell asleep on the way home. His head tipped against the window. And I drove very carefully over every bump in the road so he wouldn't wake up. That image, my father sleeping in the passenger seat, trusting me completely, in the way only sleeping people trust. That image lived in me for years. I want you to remember it too, because Diane would later tell my father that I had not visited him after his heart procedure, that I had called once briefly, and that was all. She would say this to him in 2017, when his mind had begun to soften at the edges from the medication and the grief of aging, when he could no longer always distinguish between what he remembered and what he was told he remembered. But in 2013, I was there for 5 days. I have the dates. I will come back to that. I met my husband Zane. He was a software developer, self-made, in the real sense of the word, first generation, student loans, built his career from absolute zero. Funny kind, the sort of man who remembers what you said 3 conversations ago because he was actually listening. I brought him home in November of 2014, Thanksgiving weekend, a neutral holiday. Safe ground, I thought. Diane shook his hand, smiled, asked him where he was from, not the city, but from with the particular emphasis that means something specific and not particularly welcoming. Zane answered graciously. He always answered graciously. It is both his gift and the thing that sometimes breaks my heart a little. After dinner, I overheard, and I want to be precise here. I was in the hallway, and they were in the kitchen, and I was not eavesdropping. I was simply present. I heard Diane say to Priya, she could have done so much better, but I suppose she always had different priorities than the rest of us. Different priorities. I stood in that hallway for a moment. Then I walked into the kitchen and said I was going to make tea, and I made tea, and I said nothing, because I was still, at that point, trying to keep the peace, because my father was in the living room, and he looked happy, and I could not bear to be the thing that disrupted that. But I heard it. I filed it, and here is where. I want to tell you about the folder. It started as a notes app on my phone. I am an accountant by training. I track things. I document things, not out of malice, out of habit, out of the part of my brain that was built to look at numbers and patterns and anomalies and say, something here does not reconcile. After the heart procedure incident, after I realized that information about my own father was being filtered through someone else's judgment, I started keeping notes, dates, conversations, exact quotes when I could remember them. Over time, the notes app became a Word document. The Word document became a printed record. The printed record went into a manila folder that I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk at home. I did not know, in 2013, exactly what I was building. I just knew that something was wrong in that house, and that the only thing I had ever had, the only defense I had ever relied on, was the plain and verifiable truth. So I kept recording it, year by year, detail by detail. By 2021, that folder was 47 pages long. My father was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. He was 65 years old, he told me himself, on a Sunday call. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who has decided in advance how he will deliver bad news. He gave me the medical facts clearly, concisely. He said the progression was slow. He said he had good doctors. He said, don't cry, Sara. I can hear you about to cry. I said I wasn't crying. I was absolutely crying. I drove up the following weekend, and every weekend after that, for the first 6 months, until my work schedule made every weekend impossible and we settled into every other weekend. Plus every Sunday call, plus every major holiday, plus any time he had a medical appointment that Diane deemed inconvenient, which became more frequent as time went on. here is what Parkinson's disease does. For those who don't know, it is slow. It is progressive. It takes things in a particular order. First, the small motor functions, the tremor in the hand, the shuffle in the step. Then, in some patients, it begins to affect cognition, memory, the ability to distinguish between what happened and what someone told you happened. My father's cognitive symptoms began in late 2017. They were mild at first. A repeated question, a confused timeline. Nothing alarming to an outside observer. But Diane was not an outside observer. Diane was in that house every day, and Diane understood. I believe she understood very clearly, with the strategic intelligence of a woman who had been waiting for an opportunity. What a softening memory meant. It meant the past was now malleable. It meant the story of who had shown up and who hadn't could be rewritten. And she began rewriting it. I know this because of what my father said to me in February of 2018. I had driven up for his birthday weekend. I arrived Saturday morning, as I always did. I brought food. I sat with him. We watched cricket. He always watched cricket, even when he could barely follow the score, because the sound of it comforted him. And at some point in the afternoon, he looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize on his face. It was uncertainty. My father had never looked uncertain about me. He said, "Beta, why did you not come when I was in the hospital last year, when I had the fall?" I stared at him. He had fallen in September 2017, a minor fall. He had not been hospitalized. He had been seen at an urgent care facility and sent home the same day. I had called the same evening. I had offered to come. Diane had told me on the phone that he's fine. He's resting. He doesn't want a fuss. I had sent flowers. I had called again 3 days later. He had not been hospitalized. "Baba," I said, very carefully, "you weren't in the hospital. You went to urgent care and came home the same day. I called you. We talked for 40 minutes. He frowned. Diane said. He stopped. Something moved across his face. Confusion. And then something else. Something that looked almost like the beginning of a question he wasn't sure he wanted to finish. "What did Diane say, Baba?" He looked out the window. "Never mind," he said. I get confused. I sat very still. I did not say what I was thinking. I drove home that evening, and I opened my folder and I wrote down every word of that conversation. Time, date, his exact phrasing. Diane said. And then I drove to my home office and I pulled out every document I had, every calendar entry, every phone record, every receipt from the 90-minute drives I had been making for years, and I began organizing them into something more deliberate, because I understood now, this was not going to stay a family argument. This was going to become something legal, and when it did, I was going to be ready. Summer. My brother Amir called me. This was notable because Amir and I had grown apart over the years, not from animosity, but from the particular gravitational pull of Diane's household, which had slowly absorbed him in the way that households absorb the people who are most present in them. Amir lived 20 minutes from my father's house. He had dinner there regularly. He was, without quite realizing it, inside the story that Diane was telling. But he called me in July of 2018, and his voice had something in it that I hadn't heard in a long time. Discomfort. "Sara," he said. "Has Baba talked to you about the will?" My stomach dropped. "No," I said. "Why?" He mentioned I overheard him and Diane talking. She's been pushing him to update it. She brought in some attorney. Someone Priya recommended. I said. When? 2 weeks ago. Maybe 3. I was quiet for a long moment. Amir, I said. Does he seem clear to you? Mentally? When you talk to him? A pause. Sometimes, he said, which told me everything. I called my father the following Sunday. I asked him, gently, carefully, whether he had spoken to a lawyer recently. He said yes. He said Diane had suggested it very reasonably, Sara. You know I've been putting it off for years, and that they had updated some documents. I asked if I could see the updated will. He said, of course, Beta. It's your right to know. I drove up the following weekend. The will was not available for me to see. Diane said the attorney still had it. She said this with her composed expression, her immovable smile. I drove home. I called an estate attorney on Monday morning. Her name was Miss Fernandez. She had 22 years of experience in contested estates and elder financial abuse. I told her everything, she said. Keep documenting. Keep every record. Do not confront anyone yet. Just document, I said. I've been documenting since 2013. There was a pause. She said, "Good girl. I need to pause here for just a moment, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking, why didn't she just confront Diane directly? Why didn't she just demand to see the will? Why didn't she make noise?" And I want to answer that question honestly, because I was afraid, not of Diane, not of conflict. I was afraid of my father, not of him. For him, he was sick. He was confused. He was in the care of a woman who had successfully, over 8 years, positioned herself as his primary reality. If I had walked into that house and accused his wife of manipulation and fraud, what would that have done to him? It would have broken him. And the absolute last thing I would ever do is break my father. So I waited. I documented. I trusted that the truth was the truth, and that the truth, properly preserved, would survive. Drop a comment. Would you have waited, or would you have acted sooner? I genuinely want to know, because looking back, I still ask myself that question. Don't go anywhere. It's about to get much worse before it gets better. My father's condition deteriorated significantly into a 1-9. He was 70 years old now. The Parkinson's had progressed. He had a part-time home health aide, a gentle man named Mr. Thomas, who came 3 days a week. The other 4 days, Diane managed his care. I continued to visit every other weekend. I continued to call every Sunday, but something had changed in my father's voice, a distance, subtle, not cruel, just farther away than he used to be. I told myself it was the medication, the disease, the fog that comes with it. I was partially right. In October of 2019, Amir called me again. This time his voice was different, harder. He said, "Sara, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." I said, "Tell me." He said, "Baba asked me last week why you never call him anymore." The room went very quiet. "Amir," I said, "I call him every Sunday. I have called him every Sunday for 15 years. I know," he said. "I know that. But he said Diane told him that you've been pulling away. That since you got married and got busy with your life, your calls have gotten shorter, less frequent. That you've been making excuses not to visit." I sat very still. He said, Amir continued, and his voice cracked slightly. He said he didn't want to burden you. That he understood you had your own life now. My father, who I called every Sunday without fail, who I drove 90 minutes to see every other weekend, who I had sat with in a car on the way back from a cardiologist appointment, watching him sleep against the window, driving carefully over every bump in the road. My father thought I was pulling away because his wife had told him I was pulling away, and his mind, which could no longer hold its own memories firmly enough to defend them against a consistent, patient rewriting, his mind had believed her. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because this is the part of the story that matters most, legally and personally. The following Sunday, I called my father. He answered. He sounded tired. We talked for a while about small things, cricket, the weather, how Mr. Thomas had been teaching him a new card game, and then I said, "Baba, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know it's okay to be honest with me." He said, "Always." "Beta, do you feel like I've been pulling away from you?" A long pause. "You're busy," he said. "It's okay. You have your husband, your job." "I understand, Baba. I call you every Sunday." "Yes," he said. "Yes, you do," said the way you agree with someone to protect their feelings. He did not believe me, or rather, he could not hold my truth firmly enough against the version he'd been given. I ended the call normally. I said I loved him. He said it back. And then I hung up and I sat in my car, in my parking garage, and I allowed myself exactly 12 minutes to fall apart. Then I drove inside, and I called Miss Fernandez. Ms. Fernandez told me something that I had not known. She said, "Sara, what you're describing, the systematic isolation, the rewriting of history to a cognitively vulnerable person, this isn't just family conflict. This has a legal name. It's called undue influence, and it can invalidate a will." She said, "The question is evidence. You need to be able to prove access, prove presence, prove the relationship." I said, "How do I prove phone calls?" She said, "Phone records. Your carrier keeps them. Every call, date, time, duration." I said, "How do I prove visits?" She said, "Any way you can. Credit card records for gas, receipts from restaurants near his home, photos with timestamps. And she paused, hospital and medical facility visitor logs. Those are often kept for years. They are considered administrative records. Visitor logs. I wrote that down. November 2019. I went to visit my father. While I was there, I paid attention to everything differently now. I noted that Mr. Thomas, the home health aide, greeted me by name when I arrived, smiled warmly, said, "Your Baba was asking if you were coming this weekend." I noted that there were no photos of me in the living room. There had been once a framed photo of me and my father at my university graduation. A photo of the four of us, me, Amir, Baba, and Mama, from an Eid years ago. Those photos were gone. In their place, Priya's wedding photo, a portrait of Diane and my father, a picture of Diane's grandchildren. From Priya's marriage, a living room that told the story of a family that did not include me. I photographed everything, quietly, with my phone. Time stamped, 47 pages, and growing. December 2019. My father was hospitalized for 4 days with a respiratory infection complicated by his Parkinson's medication. I drove up the day I found out. I sat with him every day for 3 of those 4 days. I signed the visitor log each time. Room for North. Patient. Harun A. Visitor. Sara last name. December 14th, December 15th, December 16th. Diane was present on December 14th and 16th. She was not present on December 15th. I know this because I checked the log before I left. I photographed it. My father came home from the hospital on December 17th, on Christmas Eve, a holiday we did not celebrate but which Diane did. I called to check on him. Diane answered. She said he was resting. She said, "You know, Sara, I'm glad you're calling. I've been meaning to talk to you. Your father, he's been asking why you didn't come to see him in the hospital. He was quite hurt. I was so prepared for this. So completely, documentarily prepared for this." I said, "Diane, I was there on the 14th, 15th, and 16th. I signed the visitor log each time." A pause, very brief, very controlled. "Oh, of course," she said. "He was on a lot of medication. He gets confused about what's real." "Yes," I said. "He does." I let that sit there between us, and then I wished her a pleasant holiday, and I hung up, and I added this conversation date, time, her exact words to the folder. My father passed away on March 8th, 2021. He was 72 years old. The immediate cause was pneumonia. The underlying cause was everything that Parkinson's had done to his body over 5 years. The weakened swallowing reflex, the respiratory complications, the cumulative weight of a disease that takes everything eventually. He had been in the hospital for 11 days. I was there for 8 of them. I have the visitor log. He died on a Monday morning. Just after 6 a.m., I was in the room. Diane was in the room. Amir was in the room. Priya was in the hallway. My father died with his family around him. And whatever version of me existed in his mind in those last days, whether it was the daughter who called every Sunday or the daughter who Diane had told him was pulling away, I was there. Physically, verifiably, documentably there. He passed with his hand in mine. That is the only thing that matters. And no one can take it from me. The funeral was March 12th. The will was read on March 26th. I sat in that lawyer's office. A different lawyer than Miss Fernandez. A lawyer I didn't recognize. A lawyer from a firm that Priya had apparently recommended, and I listened. The will had been updated in September of 2018. My father's estate, the house on Greenfield Road, the commercial real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, total value at time of death, approximately $910,000. The will left the house and 50% of the estate to Diane. It left 25% to Priya. It left 20% to Amir. It left 5% to me, 5% of my father's $910,000 estate, approximately $45,000, and there was a clause handwritten, initialed by my father, notarized, that explained the distribution. It said, "The reduced share to my daughter Sara reflects her diminished involvement in the family in recent years and is not a reflection of my love for her, but of the realities of our relationship at the time of this writing." Diminished involvement. I read those words. I read them once. I read them again, and then I folded the paper very neatly, and I placed it in my bag, and I looked at Diane and I said absolutely nothing. She was watching me. I believe she expected tears. She expected protest. She expected the kind of emotional response that could be dismissed as grief or irrationality. I gave her none of those things. I said, "Thank you." To the attorney, I said, "I'll be in touch." To no one in particular. And I left. I called Miss Fernandez from the parking lot. I said, "The will has been updated. I've been left 5%. The clause says it reflects my diminished involvement." Miss Fernandez said, "Send me everything." I said, "I have 47 pages." She said, "Send me all of it. Tonight, I want to walk you through what was in that folder. Not all 47 pages, but the pieces that mattered most, because I want you to understand this is not a story about someone who got lucky. This is not a story about a dramatic confrontation or a single smoking gun. This is a story about the long, patient, unglamorous work of a woman who knew that the truth needed to be preserved because the truth was going to be attacked. Phone records, every Sunday call for 15 years. Carrier records showing the date, time, and duration of every call between my number and my father's 347 calls, average duration, 31 minutes. The claim that I had been pulling away, calling less, distancing myself from my father. The claim that formed the basis of that handwritten clause in his will contradicted by 347 entries in a phone carrier's database, credit card, records, every gas fill up on the route between my home and my father's house. Going back to 2012, every restaurant receipt from the town where he lived, the diner where we had breakfast on visit weekends, the pharmacy where I picked up his prescriptions when Diane wasn't available, methodical, dated, irrefutable, hospital and medical facility visitor logs. This is the one that mattered most. Ms. Fernandez filed a formal request for visitor records from every medical facility my father had attended as a patient between 2013 and 2021, under HIPAA. These records belong to the patient's estate, and the estate's attorney can request them. What came back was a complete record of every logged visitor at every appointment, every urgent care visit, every hospitalization. My name appeared 43 times. December 2019. 3 consecutive days, a hospitalization in 2017 that Diane had told my father I had not attended, a cardiology appointment in 2013, 43 times. Diane's name appeared 61 times. She was there more, yes. She lived there. She was his wife, but I was there 43 times, against a narrative that said I had abandoned him 43 times. Mr. Thomas's statement, this one I did not expect. When Miss Fernandez's office contacted the Home Health Aid Agency as part of the discovery process, Mr. Thomas, who had retired but was reachable, agreed to provide a written statement. He said that during his 3 years as my father's aide, I visited consistently and regularly. He said, "My father always brightened when I was there." He said, and I want to quote this exactly because it sits in my chest like something warm and permanent. "Mr. Haroon used to tell me his daughter Sara called him every Sunday without fail. He said it like it was one of the things he counted on. Like it was a fixed point. A fixed point. That was me. A fixed point, even when his mind could no longer hold the truth of it firmly enough to defend it." The cognitive timeline. Ms. Fernandez worked with a neurologist who reviewed my father's medical records and provided an expert opinion on the likely state of his cognitive function in September 2018, the month the will was updated. The opinion stated that given the documented progression of his Parkinson's symptoms and the medications he was on at that time, my father would have been significantly susceptible to suggestion and undue influence, that his ability to independently form and hold complex judgments about personal relationships would have been materially compromised. This did not mean he didn't sign the will. It meant that the will may not have reflected his actual independent wishes. It meant that the clause diminished involvement. Realities of our relationship may have been a description of a reality that had been constructed for him by someone else and inserted into a legal document and signed with a hand that could not always distinguish between what it remembered and what it had been told to remember. This was the folder. This was 47 pages, organized by year, indexed, tab bed. Ms. Fernandez looked at it and said, "Sara, This is one of the most well-documented cases of undue influence I have seen in 22 years, I said. My mother taught me to build slowly. And honestly, she said, let's go to work. We are back now to the room I described at the beginning, the 14th floor. The thick carpet, the leather chairs, the cream blazer, the designer bag, the expensive watch on the wrist of an expensive lawyer, and me across the table, with my manila folder. Let me tell you what happened in that room. Ms. Fernandez had requested this meeting as part of the pre-litigation mediation process. She had filed a formal challenge to the will on 3 grounds: undue influence, cognitive incapacity at the time of signing, and fraudulent misrepresentation. Specifically, the false statements made to my father about my level of contact and involvement, which had formed the stated basis for the revised distribution. Diane and Priya had been advised by their attorney that this meeting was an opportunity to reach a settlement. Before the case became public record, they came because they believed they would win. I believe this because of the expression on Diane's face when she sat down, that composed, immovable, already victorious expression. She did not know what was in my folder. She had no idea that for 8 years I had been quietly, patiently, building the thing that would sit on this table between us. Ms. Fernandez opened. She laid out the 3 grounds for challenge. She was precise and professional and completely without drama. She was the kind of lawyer who wins because she is so thoroughly prepared that drama is unnecessary. Diane's attorney responded. He was confident. He said the will had been properly executed. He said the testator, my father, had been of sound mind. He said Sara had, by her own family's account, been less present in recent years. He said Ms. Fernandez said, "May I?" And she looked at me, and I slid the folder across the table. I have thought a lot about the 45 seconds that followed. Diane's attorney opened the folder. He looked at the first page, the index, organized by year, by category, by document type, and something shifted in his posture, just slightly. The shift of a man who has just understood that this is not what he was told it would be. He turned to page 1 of the phone records section. He read for a moment. He passed it to Diane, and that is when the color left her face, slowly, the way winter comes. I did not speak. I had agreed with Miss Fernandez in advance that I would let the documents speak first. Diane looked at the phone records. She looked at the hospital visitor logs. She turned to the page where December 14th, 15th, and 16th, 2019 were documented 3 days of my handwritten name in a hospital's administrative log. During the hospitalization where she had told my father I hadn't come, she looked up at me. I looked back at her. I said, "Take your time." There are 47 pages. What followed was not a dramatic collapse. Life is not a movie. There was no sobbing, no confession, no theatrical moment of reckoning. What there was math, the math of a case that Diane's attorney could now see he was not going to win. He asked for a recess. They were gone for 22 minutes. When they came back, Diane's expression had changed. The composure was still there. She was too practiced to lose it entirely, but behind it was something I had never seen on her face before. Calculation. The rapid, uncomfortable calculation of a woman revising her expectations in real time. Her attorney made a settlement offer. Ms. Fernandez and I had discussed our position in advance. We countered. They countered. It took 4 rounds. The final settlement. The will's distribution was revised. The house on Greenfield Road, my father's house, my mother's house, the house where the fruit bowl had been moved to the counter, was to be sold. Proceeds divided. My share of the total estate was adjusted from 5% to 38%, approximately $345,000. Additionally, Diane agreed in writing to issue a formal letter to Amir and to remaining family members clarifying that the characterization of my involvement in my father's life in the years preceding his death had been inaccurate. She did not admit to fraud in the letter. Her attorney had made sure of that, but she admitted the characterization was inaccurate. In writing, notarized. I want to be honest with you about how I felt when I left that building. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones after a very long journey that has finally, quietly ended. I felt grief, not new grief. The kind that had been there for years, underneath the documentation and the phone calls and the careful, patient work of preserving the truth, the grief of a girl who lost her mother, and then spent a decade watching her father be slowly turned away from her, and who could not stop it, who could only make sure the record was accurate. I sat in my car for a few minutes. I thought about my father sleeping against the passenger window. I thought about him saying, "You're busy. It's okay." The way he had been taught to understand my presence as absence. I thought about Mr. Thomas saying he counted on you, like a fixed point, and I thought, he knew. Somewhere, in whatever part of him the disease hadn't reached yet, he knew. I have to believe that. Amir. I need to talk about Amir. My brother received Diane's letter. He received it in a registered envelope on a Thursday afternoon in July of 2021, 4 months after my father's death. He called me that evening. He did not say a lot at first. He was quiet for a long moment, the way people are quiet when they are reorganizing their understanding of a significant period of their own life. Then he said, "How long did you know?" I said, that she was actively rewriting things? Since 2019. That something was wrong? Since 2012. Another silence. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were inside it, Amir. You were in that house. You were part of what made it feel normal to Baba. If I had told you, you would have confronted her, and she would have used that to isolate him further from both of us. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry." I said, "You didn't know." He said, "I should have paid more attention." I said, "You were grieving. You were trying to stay close to him. That's not a failure, Amir. That's love." We talked for a long time that night. It was the longest conversation my brother and I had had in years. It was not a repair of everything, but it was a beginning, a real one. We have dinner together now, Amir and me and Zain, once a month, sometimes more. My father would have liked that. Diane and Priya. I do not know, and genuinely do not care, the details of what happened inside their relationship after the settlement. I have heard through peripheral family channels that there was significant tension, that Priya was not pleased with how the situation had been handled, that the legal fees had been substantial, that the settlement had been considerably more damaging than Diane had anticipated. I feel no pleasure in this. I want to be clear about that. I did not pursue this case to damage Diane. I pursued it because my father's words, diminished involvement, realities of our relationship, were not his words. They were words that had been put inside him, slowly and patiently and deliberately, and attached to his name and his signature and his dying intentions. I pursued it because my mother built things slowly and honestly, and she gave me that. And I was not going to let a forged narrative stand as the ending of my father's story. The money, $345,000, mattered. I will not pretend it didn't, but it was not the point. The point was the letter, the written, notarized acknowledgement that the characterization was inaccurate, that I had been there, that I had always been there, that the visitor log told a different story. The house on Greenfield Road sold in October of 2021. I drove past it once before the closing. Just once. I parked across the street. I sat for a few minutes. I thought about the wraparound porch. I thought about the kitchen that used to smell like cardamom. I thought about my mother's ceramic fruit bowl on the table, before it was moved to the counter. I did not go inside. Some things you carry with you, and some things you leave where they are. You learn to know the difference. I drove home. I have talked a lot about what I lost in this story. I want to take a moment to talk about what I had, because no one survives a decade of this kind of thing alone. Not truly. Her name is Ruxana Annie. She is not my blood aunt. She was my mother's closest friend. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, come to this country in the same decade, built their small and dignified and real lives in the same city. When my mother died, Ruxana Annie showed up at our house with a pot of food and a look on her face that said, "I am not leaving until I am no longer needed. And I may not leave even then." She was at every eye that Diane made me feel wrong at. She was the person I called when I couldn't call my father. She is the one who, in 2018, after I told her what was happening, looked at me across her kitchen table with her tea in her hands and said, "Your mother would be so angry right now, and then, but she would also be so proud of how you're handling it." I did not cry in that Tuesday morning meeting. I did not cry in the parking lot afterward. Not really. I cried in Ruxana Annie's kitchen. 3 days later, with my tea going cold on the table, with her hand on my shoulder, and the smell of cardamom in the air because she cooked with it too. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it is the woman who keeps your mother's smell alive in her kitchen. Sometimes it is the husband who reads your notes at midnight and says you are not crazy. This is real. And I'm with you. Sometimes it is the retired home health aide who wrote in a statement that your father counted on you like a fixed point. Those people, Roxana, Andy, Zane, Mr. Thomas, even Miss Fernandez in her professional and thorough way. They were my family through this, and they are the reason I am here to tell it. I am 36 years old. My father has been gone for 3 years. I think about him every Sunday. Around the time I used to call, sometimes I almost pick up the phone. I have kept the habit of Sundays, in a different form now. Sunday is the day I call Amir. Sunday is the day Zane and I have a long breakfast with nowhere to be. Sunday is the day I allow myself to miss my father without also fighting for his memory, because the fighting is done and his memory is safe now. The record is accurate. Here is what I want to say to you. If you are somewhere in the middle of a story like mine, document everything. Not out of malice. Not out of revenge. Document. Because the truth is real, and reality can be tampered with. And the only defense against someone who is willing to rewrite history is having been precise enough, patient enough, and consistent enough to preserve it. Document the phone calls. Document the visits. Document the exact words used in the exact moments they're said. And then wait, not passively, not silently, in the sense of acceptance. Wait, strategically. Wait, with a folder. Wait, with a lawyer's number saved. Wait, with the understanding that the truth properly preserved does not expire. And here's the other thing. The harder thing. Do not do what I did at the cost of your present. I am proud of how I handled this. I believe I handled it the only way I could have, given what was at stake. But there were Sundays, many Sundays, when I was so busy building the case that I forgot to just be sad, to just miss him, to just be the daughter, instead of the document keeper. Grief is not a project. It cannot be managed into a folder. If I could go back, I would still keep every record, but I would also cry more. I would let myself be broken on the days it was warranted. Instead of saving the breaking for the controlled 12-minute sessions in parking garages, my father loved me. Even when he couldn't hold that truth firmly against what he'd been told, it was still true. It was always true. And I loved him. 347 Sunday calls. 43 visitor log entries. The careful drive over every bump in the road. That was love. Documented or not, I have one more thing to say, and then I'll let you go. People will tell you that family is family. That blood is blood. That you forgive. You move on. You keep the peace. And sometimes that is wisdom. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do for the truth is refuse to let it be buried. My father said diminished involvement in a document. He signed with a hand that could not always trust its own memory. Those were not his words, and I refused to let them be his ending. That was not revenge. That was love. The most patient, most documented, most unglamorous form of love I have ever practiced. Family is not the people who are listed in the will. Family is the people who show up and who make sure the record reflects that they were there. If you made it to the end of this, thank you, genuinely. This story took me a long time to tell, and you took the time to hear it. I have one question for you, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments. Is silence in the face of injustice the same as acceptance? Or is quiet, patient documentation a form of resistance? Tell me where you land. I'll be in the comments. If this story meant something to you, like this video. Not for me. Because somewhere out there is a woman in a parking garage giving herself 12 minutes to fall apart before she goes back inside. And she needs to know people are on her side. Subscribe, because there are more stories where this came from. Stories about people who were written off, written out, and who wrote back. Share this with someone who is in the middle of a story like mine. Who is building the folder? Who is waiting? Tell them. The visitor log remembers. I'll see you in the next one.